Lisa set her order pad down on the edge of the table with deliberate care, then began to speak. The words that came from her mouth were fluid and precise, each syllable shaped with perfect tonal accuracy. She spoke in Mandarin Chinese, but not the halting textbook Mandarin of someone who had learned a few phrases from a language program. This was the Mandarin of someone who had studied the language deeply, who understood not just vocabulary and grammar, but the subtle cultural context that gave words their full meaning. She addressed Vaughn directly, introducing herself formally and asking about his recent business ventures. Her pronunciation was flawless, her tone shifts exact, moving through the four tones of Mandarin with the ease of a native speaker. The words flowed naturally without hesitation or searching for vocabulary. She used sophisticated expressions and idiomatic phrases that demonstrated a mastery far beyond basic competency. Around the diner, people leaned forward in their seats, stunned by what they were hearing. Vaughn's confident smile began to slip. He understood Mandarin himself, having learned it years ago for business purposes, and he recognized immediately that Lisa's skill level exceeded his own. He had expected perhaps a few memorized sentences, enough for her to try and fail, giving him the satisfaction of watching her struggle. Instead, he found himself facing someone who spoke the language better than he did. His companions exchanged glances, their earlier amusement fading into uncertainty. He responded in Mandarin, his own accent noticeably inferior to hers, asking where she had learned to speak like this. Lisa continued in Mandarin without missing a beat, explaining that she had studied linguistics at the University of Beijing before the war. She mentioned specific professors by name, referenced particular programs in Chinese language and culture, and described the old campus near the Summer Palace with the kind of detail that could only come from personal experience. Vaughn knew enough about academic credentials to recognize that she was describing one of the most prestigious linguistics programs in human space. The conversation continued, flowing naturally between them. Lisa discussed classical Chinese poetry, made references to historical linguistic developments, and demonstrated knowledge of regional dialects. She shifted briefly into a Sichuanese accent to make a point about tonal variation, then returned to standard Mandarin. Every word she spoke revealed layers of expertise that seemed impossible for someone working in a neighborhood diner. The 5 minutes Vaughn had specified passed, then 10, and still Lisa continued, answering his increasingly difficult questions with ease. Finally, Vaughn raised his hand to stop her, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. The diner remained silent, everyone watching to see what would happen next. Vaughn tapped his tablet with sharp, irritated movements, transferring 100,000 credits to the account number Lisa provided. The transaction went through with a soft chime, and Lisa's tablet, which she kept in her apron pocket, vibrated to confirm receipt. She thanked him politely in English and reached for her order pad again, asking once more if she could take their drink orders. But one of Vaughn's companions, Claire Hopkins, was not ready to let the moment pass. Claire had been watching Lisa with growing fascination throughout the exchange, and now she spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. She asked the question that everyone in the diner was thinking. If Lisa had credentials from the University of Beijing, if she possessed this level of linguistic skill, why was she working as a waitress in the Starlight Diner? The question was not asked with cruelty like Vaughn's challenge, but with genuine curiosity. Lisa paused, her hand resting on the order pad. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of old pain or perhaps remembrance. Then she offered a slight smile, small but real, and said that people's circumstances were not always what they appeared to be. She added that every job had dignity, that there was honor in honest work regardless of what others might think. The statement was simple but carried weight, and several patrons nodded in agreement. An elderly man at the counter quietly said "Amen" into his coffee cup. Then, almost as an afterthought, Lisa mentioned that Mandarin was not the only language she spoke. The words were casual, delivered without pride or boasting, just a simple statement of fact. But they landed like a bomb in the quiet diner. Vaughn, whose wounded pride had been festering during the exchange, seized on this immediately. He asked, his voice dripping with skepticism, exactly how many languages she claimed to know. There was a challenge in his tone, a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand he had lost. Lisa considered the question thoughtfully, as if counting in her head. Then she answered 9. The number hung in the air. 9 languages. Not just basic competency, but the kind of fluency she had demonstrated in Mandarin. It seemed impossible. Vaughn clearly did not believe her. He laughed, but it was a harsh sound without real humor. He said she was lying, that no one could possibly master 9 languages at that level, that she was trying to make a fool of him. The diner had become a theater now, with every eye fixed on the drama unfolding. Lisa remained calm, unruffled by Vaughn's accusation. She said she would be happy to prove it if he wished. Vaughn's face darkened, but he was trapped by his own arrogance and the audience of witnesses. He made another announcement to the diner, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He would pay 100,000 credits for each additional language Lisa could demonstrate at a conversational level. Right here, right now. His companions tried to dissuade him, pointing out that he was already out 100,000 credits and that continuing this challenge was unwise. But Vaughn waved them off angrily. He had built his fortune on translation technology, on the premise that language was a barrier only wealth and innovation could overcome. The idea that a simple waitress could possess abilities that made his expensive algorithm seem primitive was intolerable to him. He needed to prove she was a fraud, or at least limit the damage to his ego. Lisa accepted the terms quietly. She asked if anyone in the diner spoke French. Near the back, an elderly couple raised their hands tentatively. The man explained that they had emigrated from France decades ago and still spoke their native language at home. Lisa walked over to their table, and after asking their permission, she began to speak with them in French. The conversation flowed easily, her accent shifting to match the Parisian dialect the couple used. They discussed French literature, and Lisa referenced Proust and Camus with the familiarity of someone who had read them in the original language. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she listened to words she had not heard spoken so beautifully in years. After several minutes, the couple confirmed to the diner that Lisa spoke French fluently, with excellent pronunciation and deep cultural knowledge. The man stood and began to applaud, and others joined in. Vaughn transferred another 100,000 credits, his jaw clenched so tight that muscles jumped in his cheek. But Lisa was not finished. She asked if anyone spoke German. A businessman in a corner booth identified himself, and Lisa approached him. They conversed in German, discussing philosophy and engineering, and again Lisa demonstrated complete fluency. The businessman, clearly impressed, shook her hand and told Vaughn that she spoke better German than many people he had worked with in Berlin. Next came Arabic. A group of students from the community college confirmed her fluency in modern standard Arabic, then marveled as she switched to an Egyptian dialect to make a joke that had them laughing in recognition. Vaughn transferred more credits, his hand shaking slightly now. His companions had stopped trying to participate in the spectacle and sat in uncomfortable silence, wishing they were anywhere else. Then Lisa asked if the cook spoke Russian. From the kitchen emerged a large man with flour on his apron and tears streaming down his face. His name was Boris, and he had worked at the Starlight Diner for 15 years. He and Lisa spoke in Russian, and Boris later told people that she spoke with the accent of his home region near Moscow, that she used phrases his grandmother had taught him, that hearing her speak was like being transported back to his childhood. He hugged her when they finished, and several patrons had to wipe their own eyes. 5 languages beyond English and Spanish. Vaughn had now lost 600,000 credits. But more than the money, he had lost something more precious to a man like him, his sense of superiority. The diner buzzed with whispered conversations, and people were recording the event on their devices, capturing the moment when a wealthy businessman's arrogance had been dismantled by a humble waitress. Vaughn's face had gone from red to pale, and he looked like a man watching his world collapse around him. Lisa stood in the center of the diner, surrounded by people who now looked at her with wonder and respect instead of the casual indifference usually afforded to service workers. She had demonstrated fluency in 7 human languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, French, German, Arabic, and Russian. Each demonstration had been more impressive than the last, revealing not just linguistic ability, but deep cultural understanding and authentic connection with the speakers. But she had claimed to know 9 languages, and the number 7 left 2 more unaccounted for. Vaughn sat at his table, his expensive suit somehow looking rumpled despite being perfectly pressed, his confident demeanor shattered. He had transferred 600,000 credits already, and each transaction had felt like a piece of his identity being stripped away. His business was built on the premise that language barriers required technological solutions, that communication across cultures was too complex for ordinary humans to master without expensive software. Yet here stood a woman who made his life's work seem unnecessary, who possessed in her own mind what he had spent billions developing in computer systems. Lisa's voice cut through the murmur of conversations. She asked with the same calm politeness she had shown throughout the evening, whether anyone in the diner was from off-world or had regular contact with non-human species. The question caused a ripple of surprise. People exchanged glances, wondering what she meant. Human languages were one thing, but alien languages were something else entirely. The biological differences between species often made their languages nearly impossible for humans to learn. Humans lacked the vocal anatomy to produce many alien sounds, and alien species often communicated through methods that human senses could barely perceive. A truck driver sitting near the back of the diner slowly raised his hand. His name was Danny Cooper, and his weathered face and calloused hands marked him as someone who worked hard for a living. He explained that he hauled cargo shipments to the Keltharian trade stations on the edge of human-controlled space. The Keltharians were a reptilian species, one of the first alien civilizations humanity had made contact with. Their language was notoriously difficult for humans because it relied heavily on hissing sounds, clicking consonants, and tonal variations that required a different vocal structure than humans possessed. Lisa smiled and asked Danny if he would mind confirming her ability if she spoke Keltharian. Danny nodded, clearly skeptical but willing to play along. He had heard plenty of humans attempt the Keltharian language, usually with embarrassing results. Even professional translators struggled with it, and most communication with Keltharians happened through AI translation devices like the ones Vaughn's company manufactured. What happened next caused the entire diner to fall into stunned silence. Lisa opened her mouth and began to produce sounds that seemed impossible for a human throat to create. There were layered hissing sounds that came from deep in her throat, sharp clicks made with her tongue against different parts of her palate, and tonal variations that shifted in pitch and resonance. The sounds wove together into patterns that clearly formed words and sentences, though they were unlike anything most people in the diner had ever heard. Danny Cooper's mouth fell open. He stood up from his booth and walked closer, listening intently. Lisa continued speaking, and after a moment, Danny responded in halting, heavily accented Keltharian. His pronunciation was rough, the kind that came from practical necessity rather than formal study, but it was enough for basic communication. They had a brief exchange, with Lisa's fluid speech contrasting sharply with Danny's labored responses. When they finished, Danny turned to face the diner, shaking his head in disbelief. He told everyone that Lisa spoke Keltharian better than anyone he had ever met, including the trained diplomats and linguists stationed at the trade posts. He said her accent was perfect, her grammar flawless, and that she had used formal diplomatic phrases that he had only heard from high-ranking Keltharian officials. Several people applauded, but the sound was muted. As if everyone was too shocked to fully process what they had witnessed, Vaughn mechanically transferred another 100,000 credits, his movements robotic. He was no longer angry, just hollowed out like a building after a fire. His companions sat frozen at the table, and Claire Hopkins had her data tablet out, frantically searching for something. But Lisa was not finished. She had claimed 9 languages, and she had only demonstrated 8. She asked if anyone in the diner had contact with the Gentari, the insectoid species Vaughn had been boasting about when he first arrived. The irony was not lost on anyone. A young man working as a maintenance worker on the night shift raised his hand nervously. His name was Kevin Price, and he explained that his brother worked on one of the Gentari embassy ships that had recently arrived in Earth's orbital space. He had visited the ship once and heard the Gentari language, though he did not understand it. The Gentari language was considered nearly impossible for humans to learn. The Gentari communicated through rapid chirping sounds and frequency modulations, some of which operated in ranges beyond normal human hearing. Their communication relied partly on picking up vibrations and sonic patterns that human ears were not designed to detect. It was the reason Vaughn's translation software was so valuable in Gentari negotiations. It could pick up the full frequency range and translate it into human speech. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, as if preparing herself. Then she began to speak in Gentari. The sounds that emerged were completely alien, a rapid series of chirps and trills that varied in pitch and speed. But there was clearly structure to it, patterns that repeated and evolved, the unmistakable rhythm of language. Lisa's voice rose and fell through registers, producing frequencies that seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone listening. Some people winced at the higher pitches while others leaned forward, straining to hear the lower tones. Kevin Price had the presence of mind to pull out his communication device and record the speech. As Lisa continued, he sent the recording to his brother on the Gentari ship. The diner waited in tense silence, watching Lisa produce these impossible sounds. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes, Kevin's device chimed with an incoming message. He read it, then read it again, his face pale with shock. He looked up at the waiting crowd and read the message aloud. His brother confirmed that the recording contained formal, diplomatic-level Gentari speech. Moreover, the content was a traditional Gentari greeting used only in the most official circumstances, expressing respect and peaceful intentions. The grammar was perfect, the frequency modulations precise, and the cultural context appropriate. Kevin's brother wanted to know who had made the recording because even the professional translators working at the embassy struggled to produce Gentari speech at this level. The diner erupted in applause, genuine and thunderous this time. People stood from their seats clapping and cheering. Boris the cook emerged from the kitchen again, wiping his eyes. The elderly French couple held hands and smiled. Danny Cooper whistled loudly. Even some of Vaughn's companions began to applaud, caught up in the moment despite themselves. Lisa stood quietly in the center of it all, accepting the praise with a modest nod, but not basking in it. She looked tired suddenly, as if the demonstrations had drained something from her. 9 languages, just as she had claimed. 7 human languages, plus 2 alien tongues that most humans could not even begin to pronounce. Vaughn transferred the final 100,000 credits, bringing his total payment to 800,000 credits for the evening. But the atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer about the money or the challenge. People wanted to know who Lisa really was. The question Claire Hopkins had asked earlier echoed in everyone's minds. How did someone with these abilities end up working as a waitress in a neighborhood diner? This was not ordinary skill. This was the kind of ability that nations recruited, that corporations headhunted, that could command positions of power and influence across human space. Vaughn finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and defeated. He stood from his booth and demanded to know who Lisa was, what she was hiding, why she was here. The questions were aggressive, but there was a desperate quality to them, as if understanding her would somehow restore the order of his world. Other people in the diner echoed the sentiment more kindly, asking Lisa to share her story if she was willing. Lisa looked at the faces turned toward her, seeing curiosity and kindness in most of them, desperation in Vaughn's expression, and something else in Claire Hopkins's eyes that might have been recognition. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Claire gasped and held up her data tablet. The screen glowed in the dimming light of the diner, and Claire's hands trembled slightly as she stared at what she had found. Claire had been searching through public records and declassified files, while Lisa demonstrated the alien languages. She had started with simple searches about linguistics programs and language specialists, then moved into government databases that were partially accessible to people with the right security clearances. As someone who had worked in corporate intelligence for Vaughn, Claire had access to information that most civilians never saw, and she had found something that made all the pieces fall into place. She turned the tablet around so others could see the screen. There was a photograph there several years old, showing a woman in a formal uniform standing with a group of diplomats in front of what looked like a spacecraft. The woman in the photo was younger, her hair shorter, her face fuller and unmarked by the subtle lines of stress that now creased Lisa's features. But it was unmistakably her. Below the photo was text, most of it blacked out with redaction marks, but enough remained visible to tell a story. Claire's voice shook as she read aloud. The file identified Lisa Martinez as the Chief Communication Specialist for the First Contact Initiative, humanity's premier program for establishing diplomatic relations with newly discovered alien species. The dates on the file showed she had held this position for nearly 8 years, from 2236 to 2244. The list of her accomplishments was staggering even in its redacted form. She had been part of first contact teams for 17 different alien civilizations. She had helped negotiate the treaties that allowed humanity to establish trade routes through Keltharian space. She had been present at the signing of the non-aggression pact with the Gentari. The diner was silent except for Claire's voice. People leaned in to hear better, their food forgotten, their previous conversations abandoned. Lisa stood very still, her face carefully neutral, but her hands gripped the order pad so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Claire continued reading, her voice growing softer as she reached the end of the visible text. The file mentioned an incident. 3 years ago, Lisa had been part of a diplomatic mission to establish contact with a species called the Vorash, an aggressive and territorial civilization that controlled a strategic region of space. The mission had been kept secret to avoid public panic, but it was considered crucial for humanity's continued expansion. The diplomatic ship, carrying a crew of 23 people including Lisa, had entered Vorash space under flags of peace. Something had gone wrong. The details were heavily redacted, but the outcome was clear. The Vorash had attacked the ship. 20 people died. Only 3 survived, and Lisa Martinez was one of them. She had been rescued by a military patrol ship after drifting in an escape pod for 4 days. The incident had been classified to avoid political fallout and prevent hysteria about hostile aliens. The survivors had been quietly retired from service, given medical care and counseling, and released from their duties with full benefits and strict non-disclosure agreements. Claire looked up from the tablet, her eyes meeting Lisa's across the diner. There was understanding there now, and compassion. She said quietly that Lisa was not just a skilled linguist. She was a hero who had helped build the bridges between humanity and the alien species that now shared the galaxy. She had walked among the stars, spoken words that no human had spoken before, and helped forge the peace that allowed people like Vaughn to conduct their comfortable business deals. The weight of this revelation settled over the diner like a physical presence. People looked at Lisa with new eyes, seeing not a waitress but someone who had shaped the future of human civilization. Several patrons had tears in their eyes. Boris the cook came out of the kitchen and stood with his hand over his heart. The elderly French couple looked at each other and then at Lisa with expressions of profound respect. Vaughn remained standing at his booth, but he seemed to have shrunk somehow, diminished by the truth. His whole identity had been built on the idea that he was important, that his contributions to interstellar commerce made him special. But Lisa had done in person, with her own voice and her own courage, what he only approximated through computer algorithms. She had stood face to face with alien beings, learned their languages from them directly, and helped humanity take its place in a crowded galaxy. Lisa finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She thanked Claire for finding the information, but asked her to put the tablet away. She said that yes, the file was accurate, but it was also the past. She explained that after the Vorash incident, she could not continue in her old role. Every time she tried to prepare for a new mission, she would have panic attacks. The sound of ship engines made her nauseous. The thought of entering alien space filled her with terror that she could not control. She described the guilt that haunted her. 20 people had died and she had lived. Some of them had been her friends, colleagues she had worked with for years. She remembered their names, their faces, the last conversations she had with them before the attack. The nightmares were constant. Therapy helped, but it could not erase what had happened. She had tried to return to work, tried to push through the trauma, but it became clear that she was broken in ways that time and treatment might never fully heal. The government had been kind in their own way. They gave her a generous pension, enough to live comfortably without working. They offered her consulting positions, academic appointments, honors, and recognition. But Lisa did not want any of it. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be somewhere quiet where no one knew her story, where she could be just another person doing ordinary work. She wanted to feel normal again, or at least find a new version of normal that she could live with. So she had moved to New Houston under her real name, but without mentioning her past. She had found the Starlight Diner and asked Paul Chen for a job. He had hired her to wait tables, and for 6 months she had done exactly that. She served coffee, took orders, wiped down tables, and went home to her small apartment at night. It was simple work, and there was healing in that simplicity. Every customer she served was a small connection, a brief human interaction that required nothing more than kindness and efficiency. No life or death negotiations, no cultural mistakes that could start wars, just coffee and conversation. She told the diner that she had learned something important in those 6 months. Every person she met had value. The truck driver hauling cargo was doing work that kept civilization running. The students studying in the corner booth were investing in their futures. The elderly couple sharing a meal had decades of wisdom and experience. Even someone like Vaughn, despite his arrogance, played a role in the vast machinery of human society. Everyone mattered, regardless of their job title or bank account. Lisa said that working at the diner had taught her to see dignity in ordinary life. Her old work had been important, but it had also been isolating. She had spent years focused on grand diplomatic missions while forgetting that civilization was built on millions of small interactions between ordinary people. Here at the Starlight Diner, she was part of that foundation. She was not special, and that was exactly what she needed to be. The diner remained quiet as Lisa finished speaking. Her words had a weight to them, the kind of truth that comes from genuine experience and reflection. People nodded slowly, absorbing what she had shared. Several patrons wiped their eyes discreetly. Even Vaughn seemed affected, though he still stood rigid at his booth, struggling to process everything that had happened. Vaughn stood at his booth, his face cycling through emotions like a broken display screen. Shame, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been the first stirrings of humility all flickered across his features. The diner watched him, waiting to see what he would do next. His companions had gone very quiet, and Claire Hopkins had set down her tablet and was watching him with an expression that suggested she was reevaluating everything she knew about her employer. Finally, Vaughn seemed to gather himself. He straightened his expensive suit jacket and cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier arrogance, but there was still a calculating quality to it. He addressed Lisa directly, saying that he owed her an apology for his earlier behavior. The words came out stiffly, as if he was not accustomed to apologizing, but he pushed through. He said he had been rude and presumptuous and that he had underestimated her in ways that now seemed embarrassingly obvious. Then, almost without pausing, Vaughn pivoted to what he clearly believed was a generous offer. He said that someone with Lisa's skills was wasted working in a diner. He told her that his company, Vaughn Translation Technologies, would be honored to employ her as a senior cultural consultant. The position would come with a substantial salary, full benefits, an office in the executive tower downtown, and the respect that someone of her achievements deserved. He painted a picture of important meetings, high-level negotiations, and the kind of prestige that matched her background. As Vaughn spoke, his confidence began to return. This was familiar territory for him, the world of business deals and employment offers. He seemed to believe that Lisa's revelation had created an opportunity, that hiring her would associate his company with her accomplishments and repair the damage to his reputation. Several of his companions nodded encouragingly, clearly thinking this was a smart move. Even some people in the diner looked at Lisa expectantly, assuming she would accept. But Lisa was already shaking her head before Vaughn finished speaking. She thanked him politely for the offer, her tone genuinely appreciative but firm. She said she understood he meant well, but she was not interested in returning to that kind of work. The corporate world, with its pressure and expectations, was exactly what she had been trying to escape. She had spent years in high-stakes environments where every word mattered, where mistakes could have catastrophic consequences, and she was done with that life. Vaughn looked confused, then frustrated. He increased the salary offer, adding stock options and a company shuttle for her commute. Lisa continued to decline, still polite but increasingly definitive. She explained that he was not listening to what she had told everyone. She did not want prestige or recognition. She wanted peace. She wanted ordinary days and simple interactions. She wanted to go home at night without carrying the weight of interstellar politics on her shoulders. The rejection clearly stung Vaughn's pride. He started to argue, saying that she was throwing away an incredible opportunity, that working in a diner was beneath someone of her caliber. But before he could continue, Boris the cook spoke up from where he stood near the kitchen. His voice was heavily accented but clear, and there was steel in it. He said that working in the diner was not beneath anyone, that honest work had dignity, and that if Vaughn could not understand that, then he had learned nothing from the evening. Other patrons murmured agreement. The elderly Frenchman said that his father had been a janitor and had been the finest man he ever knew. A student said her mother cleaned houses to put her through college and deserved more respect than any corporate executive. Danny Cooper, the truck driver, stood and said he was tired of people like Vaughn looking down on working folks, that the world needed waitresses and cooks and drivers just as much as it needed businessmen, maybe more. The diner had turned against Vaughn completely now. What had started as his attempt at public humiliation of a waitress had transformed into a collective rejection of his values. People were standing, speaking out, sharing their own stories of hard work and dignity. Claire Hopkins looked at her employer and then slowly stood up from the booth and took a step away, distancing herself physically from him. Lisa raised her hand and the diner gradually quieted. She addressed Vaughn one final time, and her words carried a weight that made everyone listen. She told him that his translation algorithms were built on the work of people like her, people who had spent years in the field learning languages the difficult way, face to face with alien beings. She said that technology was valuable, but it was not a replacement for human connection and understanding. The software he was so proud of could translate words, but it could not build relationships or understand cultural context or navigate the complex emotional landscape of genuine communication. She continued, saying that wealth did not make him superior to anyone in the diner. The waitress serving his coffee might have walked between stars while he sat in comfortable offices. The cook making his food might have stories of courage and sacrifice that dwarfed anything in Vaughn's corporate biography. Every person deserved respect not because of their job title or bank balance, but because they were human beings doing their best to live meaningful lives. Lisa's voice was not angry or accusatory. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had seen enough of the universe to understand what truly mattered. She told Vaughn that she hoped someday he would understand that meaning came not from status or wealth, but from choosing your own path and respecting the paths of others. She said she had chosen to work at the Starlight Diner, and it was a choice she was proud of. The silence that followed was profound. Vaughn stood frozen, his face pale, all his bluster and confidence stripped away. He looked around the diner and saw only condemnation and disappointment in the faces looking back at him. Even his own companions would not meet his eyes. Claire Hopkins had taken another step away and was gathering her belongings, clearly preparing to leave. Vaughn finally seemed to realize that there was nothing he could say to salvage the situation. He had come into the diner believing himself superior to everyone there, and he was leaving having been thoroughly educated about his own insignificance. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. His companions scrambled to follow, except for Claire, who remained standing by the booth. As Vaughn reached the door, Danny Cooper called out to him. Vaughn paused, his hand on the handle, and Danny said that he hoped Vaughn had learned something tonight, but he doubted it. Men like him rarely did. Vaughn's shoulders tightened, but he did not respond. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the night, followed by his uncomfortable associates. Claire Hopkins approached Lisa, her data tablet clutched to her chest. She apologized for working for Vaughn, saying she had not realized how toxic his attitudes were until tonight. She had been so focused on the prestige of the job and the salary that she had ignored the warning signs about his character. Watching him humiliate Lisa and then seeing Lisa's grace and dignity in response had opened her eyes. Lisa told Claire that everyone makes mistakes, and recognizing them was the first step toward growth. Claire nodded, then hesitated before asking a question. She wanted to know if Lisa would ever consider teaching, sharing her knowledge with students who wanted to learn languages and cross-cultural communication, not in a corporate setting but in an academic environment where the focus was on genuine learning rather than profit. Lisa considered this thoughtfully. She said she would think about it, that teaching might be something she could do without the pressure of her old work. Claire smiled and gave Lisa her contact information, saying she was going to quit working for Vaughn and start her own consulting firm focused on ethical business practices. If Lisa ever wanted to explore teaching opportunities, Claire would help connect her with universities. As Claire left, the diner slowly returned to normal. People finished their meals, Conversations resumed, but there was a different energy in the air now. Several patrons approached Lisa to thank her, not just for the demonstration of languages, but for standing up to Vaughn's arrogance. Boris hugged her again and insisted her meal was free for life. The next morning, Lisa arrived at the Starlight Diner expecting a normal shift, but she found Paul Chen waiting for her outside the door. The owner looked tired but excited, his normally calm demeanor replaced with barely contained energy. He held up his data tablet and showed Lisa the screen. The video of her exchange with Vaughn had gone viral across human space. Millions of people had watched it overnight, shared it, commented on it, and turned it into one of the most discussed events on the social networks. The video had been recorded by several patrons on their personal devices, and the best angles had been edited together into a compelling narrative. It showed Vaughn's arrogant challenge, Lisa's calm demonstrations in language after language, the revelation of her identity, and her quiet rejection of Vaughn's job offer. The comment sections were overwhelmingly supportive of Lisa and scathing toward Vaughn. People praised her humility, celebrated her achievements, and expressed admiration for her choice to live a simple life after trauma. Paul told Lisa that the diner's communication system had been overwhelmed with calls and messages. News organizations wanted interviews. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell her story. Universities were offering speaking engagements. Companies were proposing endorsement deals. The attention was intense and immediate, the kind of fame that could change everything. Paul looked worried as he told her this, clearly concerned about how she would handle the sudden intrusion into the quiet life she had built. Lisa took a deep breath and asked Paul what he wanted to do. He looked surprised by the question, then understood. As the owner, he could capitalize on this attention, turn the diner into a tourist destination, raise prices, and profit from her sudden fame. Or he could try to protect her privacy and maintain the diner's character. Paul smiled and said that the Starlight Diner had been serving good food to good people for 30 years, and he was not about to change that now. Whatever Lisa decided, he would support her. They went inside together, and Lisa put on her uniform and prepared for the morning shift. Within an hour, it became clear that life was not going to return to normal anytime soon. People began arriving specifically to see her, to meet the woman from the video. Some were genuine, expressing thanks for her service to humanity or sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery. Others were less welcome, treating the diner like a museum and Lisa like an exhibit. By midday, there was a line outside the diner that stretched around the block. Paul had to hire temporary security to manage the crowd. Lisa tried to work her normal shift, but it was impossible. Every table wanted to talk to her, take photos with her, hear her speak in different languages. Some requests were touching, like the young student who asked Lisa to say a blessing in Arabic for her grandmother's health. Others were intrusive, like the social media influencer who tried to live stream their entire interaction without permission. Through it all, Lisa remained patient and kind, but Paul could see the strain in her eyes. This was exactly what she had been trying to escape, being known, being watched, being expected to perform. During a brief lull, Paul told her to take the rest of the day off to go home and rest. Lisa gratefully accepted, slipping out the back door to avoid the crowd. Over the following days, the situation intensified. Reporters camped outside Lisa's apartment building. Her communication device rang constantly with unknown numbers. The attention was suffocating, turning her peaceful existence into a circus. She stopped going to the diner because her presence caused too much disruption. Paul understood but worried about her, calling each day to check on her well-being. Meanwhile, the fallout for Vaughn was severe and swift. Video clips of his behavior went viral separately, showing his arrogance and cruelty in the worst possible light. Business partners began distancing themselves from his company. Several major contracts were canceled, with clients citing concerns about corporate culture and ethical practices. Vaughn Translation Technologies' stock price dropped significantly. Industry analysts discussed whether the company could recover from the reputational damage. Vaughn himself disappeared from public view, his social media accounts going silent, his usual appearances at corporate events canceled. Some reports suggested he had entered a private rehabilitation facility for stress management. Others claimed he was meeting with crisis management consultants. Either way, his fall from grace was as public and dramatic as his humiliation in the diner had been. Claire Hopkins followed through on her decision to leave Vaughn's company. She resigned publicly, writing an open letter about toxic workplace cultures and the importance of ethical leadership. The letter was widely shared and praised, and Claire quickly found herself in demand as a consultant on corporate responsibility. She stayed in contact with Lisa through messages, respecting her need for privacy while offering support. After 2 weeks of chaos, Lisa made a decision. She could not return to complete anonymity, but she could choose how to move forward. She contacted Claire and said she was ready to explore the teaching opportunity they had discussed. Claire connected her with the dean of the linguistics department at New Houston Community College, a practical institution that focused on training students for real-world careers rather than pursuing prestige. The dean, a woman named Patricia Cole, met with Lisa in a quiet coffee shop away from the public eye. Patricia was in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of students pass through her programs. She told Lisa that she had watched the video like everyone else, but she was more interested in Lisa's thoughts about education than her viral fame. They talked for hours about language learning, cultural understanding, and the best ways to prepare students for an increasingly interconnected galaxy. Patricia offered Lisa a position teaching one evening course per week, Introduction to Interspecies Communication. The class would cover basic linguistic concepts, cultural sensitivity, and practical skills for anyone planning to work in environments with alien contact. It would be a small class, maybe 20 students meeting once a week for 3 hours. The pay was modest, the commitment manageable, and the expectations reasonable. Patricia made it clear that Lisa could step away at any time if it became too much. Lisa accepted the offer with a feeling of cautious hope. This felt different from the corporate position Vaughn had offered or the high-pressure consulting roles others had proposed. This was about sharing knowledge with people who genuinely wanted to learn, in an environment that valued education over profit. It was a way to use her skills without sacrificing her peace. She also made an arrangement with Paul Chen. She would return to working at the Starlight Diner, but only a few shifts per week during off-peak hours when the crowds had thinned. Paul agreed immediately, understanding that the routine and normalcy of the work was therapeutic for her. He also implemented a new policy: no photographs or recordings inside the diner without permission from all parties involved. Signs went up explaining that the Starlight Diner was a place for everyone to enjoy a meal in peace, and anyone who could not respect that would be asked to leave. Gradually, over the course of a month, the viral attention began to fade. New stories captured public interest, and the crowds outside the diner diminished. People still recognized Lisa occasionally, but most were respectful, offering a nod or a quiet word of thanks before leaving her alone. The regular patrons at the diner, the people who had been coming there long before the incident, welcomed her back with genuine warmth and then treated her exactly as they had before, as their friendly neighborhood waitress who happened to know 9 languages. Lisa's first class at the community college was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in September. She arrived early, carrying notes she had prepared and a nervous flutter in her stomach that reminded her of her first diplomatic mission years ago. The classroom was modest, with about 20 desks arranged in a semicircle and a large display screen on the front wall. The students began filing into the classroom 15 minutes before the scheduled start time, and Lisa watched them with growing interest. They were a diverse group, representing the kind of cross-section of humanity that made New Houston such a vibrant city. There were young people fresh out of secondary school, older adults returning to education after years in the workforce, immigrants from different Earth nations, and even a few individuals who had been born on off-world colonies. Some wore business attire coming straight from office jobs. Others wore work uniforms or casual clothes. They took their seats quietly, most of them glancing at Lisa with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. When the class time arrived, Lisa stood and introduced herself simply. She wrote her name on the board and told the students they could call her Lisa or Professor Martinez, whatever felt comfortable. She did not mention the viral video or her background with the First Contact Initiative unless asked. Instead, she started with a question. Why had each of them chosen to take this course? She wanted to understand their motivations, their goals, their hopes for what they might learn. The responses were illuminating. A young man named Carlos worked at the spaceport loading cargo and wanted to better communicate with the alien crews that passed through. A middle-aged woman named Ruth managed a restaurant that served both human and Keltharian customers and struggled with cultural misunderstandings. A recent high school graduate named Amy dreamed of becoming a diplomat someday and saw this class as a first step. A military veteran named Jack was preparing to work as a civilian contractor on alien trade stations and needed practical communication skills. Each student had a real reason for being there, a genuine need that Lisa could help address. This was not about prestige or theoretical knowledge. This was about equipping people with tools they could use in their actual lives. Lisa felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose that was different from what she had felt during her diplomatic career, but no less meaningful. She began the first lesson by asking students to forget everything they thought they knew about language. She told them that human languages were just one way to organize communication, that alien species had developed completely different approaches based on their biology, environment, and cognitive structures. She showed them recordings of Keltharian speech, Gentari communication, and several other alien languages, asking them to listen not for words, but for patterns. The students were fascinated. Lisa moved around the classroom, encouraging discussion, answering questions, and gently correcting misconceptions. She shared stories from her own experiences, carefully edited to focus on linguistic insights rather than the dramatic or traumatic aspects. She described the first time she heard Keltharian poetry and realized that their hissing sounds could express emotions as complex as any human verse. She talked about the mathematical precision of Gentari grammar and how it reflected their hive-based social structure. 3 hours passed quickly, and when Lisa called the class to an end, several students lingered to ask additional questions. Carlos wanted to know the best way to start learning basic Keltharian phrases. Ruth asked for advice on cultural gestures that might offend Keltharian customers. Amy requested recommendations for books on xenolinguistics. Lisa answered each question patiently, energized rather than drained by the interaction. As the last students left, Patricia Cole appeared in the doorway. The dean had been observing from the back of the room for the final hour, and now she approached with a smile. She told Lisa that the class had been excellent, that the students were engaged and clearly learning. She asked if Lisa would be willing to add a second course in the spring semester, perhaps something more advanced for students who wanted to pursue interspecies communication as a career. Lisa said she would consider it, feeling a cautious optimism about the future. She was not ready to commit to more than one class yet, but the experience had been positive enough to leave the door open. Patricia understood and said the offer would remain available whenever Lisa felt ready. Lisa left the college campus as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She took the public transport to her apartment, blending into the evening crowd of workers heading home. No one recognized her or bothered her. She was just another person at the end of a long day, and that anonymity felt like a gift. At home, she made a simple dinner and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her data tablet chimed with a message from Claire Hopkins. Claire's new consulting firm was doing well, focusing on helping companies develop ethical practices in their interstellar operations. She had just landed a major contract with a shipping consortium and wanted to share the good news. Lisa sent back a congratulatory message and a suggestion that they meet for coffee soon. Another message came from Boris at the diner. He had made a special batch of his grandmother's Russian honey cake and saved a piece for Lisa's next shift. The simple kindness of the gesture made her smile. These connections, these small moments of shared humanity were what made life meaningful. Over the following months, Lisa settled into a routine that felt sustainable and fulfilling. She worked 3 shifts per week at the Starlight Diner, usually during the quieter afternoon hours. She taught her Tuesday evening class at the community college, slowly growing more confident as an instructor. She spent her free time reading, walking through the city parks, and occasionally meeting with Claire or other friends she had made since arriving in New Houston. The viral fame faded almost completely. Occasionally, someone would recognize her and express appreciation for her service or her stand against Vaughn's arrogance, but these interactions became rarer and more respectful. The internet had moved on to new controversies and new heroes. Lisa was grateful for the obscurity, for the chance to live without constant scrutiny. News about Vaughn filtered through occasionally. His company had stabilized after significant restructuring, and the departure of several executives. Vaughn himself had stepped down as CEO, though he retained ownership of the company. Reports suggested he had taken time for personal reflection and was attempting to rebuild his reputation through charitable donations and public apologies. Lisa felt no particular satisfaction or anger about his situation. He was simply someone who had crossed her path briefly and then moved on, learning whatever lessons he was capable of learning. Her students thrived under her teaching. Several went on to pursue careers in interspecies relations, sending her messages of thanks as they landed positions on diplomatic ships or alien trade stations. Carlos became fluent enough in basic Keltharian to earn a promotion at the spaceport. Ruth successfully resolved several cultural conflicts at her restaurant and saw her Keltharian customer base grow. Amy was accepted into a prestigious xenolinguistics program at a university off-world and credited Lisa's class with inspiring her. These successes meant more to Lisa than any diplomatic treaty she had signed. She was shaping the future not through grand gestures but through patient education, helping ordinary people build bridges across the vast diversity of the galaxy. It was quiet work, often invisible, but it rippled outward in ways she could not fully measure. Patricia Cole eventually convinced Lisa to add a second course, an advanced seminar on Keltharian and Gentry languages for students who wanted specialized training. The class was smaller, just 8 students, but their dedication was remarkable. Lisa pushed them harder, teaching not just vocabulary and grammar but the cultural context and subtle nuances that could make the difference between successful communication and dangerous misunderstanding. She also began writing a textbook, working on it slowly during her free hours. The book was a practical guide to interspecies communication, designed for students and professionals who needed real-world skills rather than academic theory. Claire helped her find a publisher, a small educational press that specialized in accessible learning materials. The advance was modest, but Lisa did not care about the money. She wanted to share what she had learned in a format that could reach people beyond her classroom. 2 years after the incident with Vaughn, Lisa stood in the Starlight Diner during a quiet afternoon shift, wiping down tables and preparing for the dinner rush. The diner had become more than just a workplace to her. It was a community, a gathering place where people from all walks of life came together over simple food and honest conversation. The regular customers knew her story by now, but they treated her with the comfortable familiarity of neighbors rather than the awe of strangers meeting a celebrity. Boris was in the kitchen preparing his famous beef stew, singing old Russian folk songs in a voice that rumbled through the swinging doors. Paul Chen sat at the counter doing paperwork, occasionally looking up to smile at customers or call out a greeting. The elderly French couple occupied their usual booth by the window, holding hands across the table as they had for the past 40 years. Danny Cooper sat at the counter nursing coffee before his next long haul to the Keltharian stations. New faces mixed with familiar ones, creating the ever-changing tapestry of humanity that made the diner feel alive. A young woman entered, looking nervous and out of place. She wore the uniform of a corporate intern, her clothes too new and her posture too rigid. She stood near the entrance, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Lisa. She approached hesitantly and asked in a whisper if Lisa was the woman from the video. Lisa confirmed with a patient smile, and the young woman introduced herself as Sophie Grant. She worked as an intern at a mid-sized trading company and had been sent to meet with Keltharian clients the following week. She was terrified of making cultural mistakes and had watched Lisa's viral video dozens of times, taking notes on everything Lisa had said about respect and communication. Sophie explained that she had tracked Lisa down and learned she worked at the Starlight Diner. She apologized for intruding, but said she had no one else to ask for advice. Her company provided only basic translation software and a brief cultural orientation packet. She was expected to represent humanity in a negotiation worth millions of credits, and she felt completely unprepared. The desperation in her voice was genuine, and Lisa recognized something of her younger self in this anxious intern. Lisa invited Sophie to sit in a booth and brought her coffee without asking. She spent the next hour giving Sophie a crash course in Keltharian culture, teaching her key phrases in the Keltharian language, explaining the significance of certain gestures and the proper protocols for business meetings. She emphasized that showing genuine effort to understand was more important than perfect execution, that the Keltharians respected those who tried even if they made mistakes. Sophie listened with intense concentration, recording parts of the conversation on her data tablet with Lisa's permission. When they finished, Sophie thanked Lisa with tears in her eyes and tried to pay for the consultation. Lisa refused the money but gave Sophie her contact information and told her she could reach out if she had questions after the meeting. Sophie left the diner walking taller, some of her anxiety replaced by confidence. This interaction had become common over the past 2 years. People sought Lisa out at the diner, not as fans, but as students needing guidance. She helped them freely, seeing it as an extension of her teaching work. Paul had started keeping a small table in the back reserved for these impromptu tutoring sessions, and he never charged Lisa's students for their coffee or meals while they learned. As evening approached, Claire Hopkins arrived for their monthly dinner together. Claire's consulting firm had grown significantly, and she now employed 15 people helping companies develop ethical practices in interspecies commerce. She credited Lisa's influence with shaping her approach, always emphasizing respect and genuine understanding over mere compliance with regulations. Tonight, Claire brought news that made her grin with barely contained excitement. She had been contacted by a coalition of community colleges across human space. They wanted to develop a standardized curriculum for interspecies communication, based on Lisa's teaching methods and the textbook she had written. The program would train thousands of students each year, preparing them for careers in the increasingly diverse galactic economy. They wanted Lisa to serve as the lead curriculum designer, a role that would involve significant work, but could be done largely remotely and on her own schedule. Lisa listened carefully as Claire outlined the opportunity. The compensation would be substantial, enough that she could stop working at the diner if she chose. The impact would be enormous, shaping how humanity educated the next generation of communicators. But the project would also require her to step back into a more visible role, to work with administrators and institutions, to accept a level of recognition that she had spent 2 years trying to avoid. She told Claire she needed time to think about it, and Claire understood. They spent the rest of dinner talking about other things, sharing stories from their weeks and enjoying the simple pleasure of friendship. After Claire left, Lisa remained in the booth, thinking about the offer and what it meant for the life she had built. Paul joined her with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. He had overheard some of the conversation, and he asked Lisa what she was going to do. Lisa admitted she was torn. The opportunity aligned with her skills and could help many people, but it also threatened the peace she had worked hard to achieve. Paul listened, then offered his perspective. He said that Lisa had come to the diner looking for healing, and she had found it. But healing was not the same as hiding. She had regained her strength and rebuilt her sense of purpose. Maybe it was time to use those gifts in bigger ways again, not returning to her old life, but creating something new that honored both who she had been and who she had become. Lisa considered his words throughout the evening shift. She thought about her students at the community college, about people like Sophie who needed guidance, about the millions of humans venturing into space who would benefit from better cultural education. She thought about the 20 people who had died on the mission to the Voresh, whose deaths had haunted her for years. What would honor their memory more? Hiding from the work they had all believed in, or finding a way to continue that work in a form she could sustain? By the time her shift ended, Lisa had made her decision. She contacted Claire and accepted the curriculum position, but with conditions. She would work primarily from home, limiting travel and public appearances. Her name would be on the materials, but she would not become the public face of the program. The focus should remain on the education itself, not on her personal story. Claire agreed immediately, understanding that Lisa needed these boundaries to maintain her well-being. Over the following year, Lisa threw herself into developing the curriculum while maintaining her other commitments. She continued teaching her 2 courses at the community college, working her shifts at the Starlight Diner, and writing additional teaching materials. The work was demanding but fulfilling, pushing her skills without overwhelming her limits. The curriculum project connected her with educators across human space, creating a network of people who shared her commitment to building understanding across species and cultures. The program launched the following fall semester at 20 community colleges simultaneously. Early reports suggested strong enrollment and positive student outcomes. Teachers using Lisa's materials praised their practicality and cultural sensitivity. Students reported feeling better prepared for real-world interactions with alien species. The program was already being expanded to additional institutions. Lisa watched this growth with quiet satisfaction. Her name was attached to the curriculum, and she received occasional recognition, but the viral fame had not returned. Instead, she had achieved something more valuable, meaningful impact without the crushing pressure of public scrutiny. She had found a way to serve humanity's expansion into the galaxy while honoring her own needs and limitations. On a Saturday afternoon 3 years after the incident with Vaughn, Lisa was working at the Starlight Diner when a familiar figure entered. It took her a moment to recognize Gregory Vaughn. He looked different, older and somehow smaller despite being the same physical size. His expensive suit had been replaced with casual clothes, and he carried himself with less arrogance than she remembered. He stood near the entrance, clearly uncertain whether to approach. Lisa walked over and greeted him politely, asking if he wanted a table. Vaughn seemed surprised that she recognized him, then grateful that she had not thrown him out. He asked if they could talk for a few minutes, and Lisa led him to a booth. She brought coffee without asking and sat across from him, waiting to hear what he had to say. Vaughn apologized. The apology was longer and more genuine than his attempt in the diner 3 years ago. He talked about how the viral video had forced him to confront his attitudes and behaviors, how losing his CEO position had been humbling but necessary. He had spent time in therapy working through his need to feel superior to others, examining where that need came from and how it had damaged his relationships in business. He had started volunteering with organizations that helped refugees and immigrants, doing simple work that taught him about dignity and respect. He told Lisa that he had watched the curriculum program launch and recognized her name. The evening sky over New Houston glowed with the orange and purple hues of sunset as the last transport ships descended toward the commercial district. The year was 2247, and humanity had spread across dozens of star systems, but places like the Starlight Diner remained unchanged, serving coffee and comfort food to anyone who walked through the door. The diner sat on the corner of Fifth Avenue and Market Street, a small establishment with worn booths and flickering neon signs that had seen better days. Inside, the dinner rush was just beginning, and Lisa Martinez moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail and her uniform clean despite the long shift. Lisa had worked at the Starlight Diner for 6 months now, ever since she arrived in New Houston with nothing but a small bag of belongings and a need to disappear from her old life. The owner, Paul Chen, had hired her without asking too many questions, sensing that she needed a fresh start. Her co-workers knew little about her except that she was reliable, polite, and preferred to keep to herself during breaks. She never talked about where she came from or what she did before arriving at the diner. The customers appreciated her quiet professionalism, and the regular patrons had grown fond of her gentle smile and efficient service. The diner attracted all kinds of people. Workers from the nearby factories came in for breakfast before their shifts. Students from the community college studied in the corner booths over endless cups of coffee. Truck drivers hauling cargo to the spaceport stopped for hot meals before long journeys. Occasionally, wealthy business people from the corporate towers downtown would venture into the neighborhood, looking for authentic food or simply slumming for the experience. Lisa treated everyone the same, with quiet respect and attentive service, never judging anyone by their appearance or their order. On this particular evening, Lisa was refilling coffee cups at the counter when the door chimed and a group of well-dressed people entered. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all wearing expensive suits that looked out of place against the diner's humble decor. They carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to being the most important individuals in any room. The man leading the group was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair styled perfectly and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. His name was Gregory Vaughn, though Lisa did not know this yet. Vaughn surveyed the diner with barely concealed disdain, his eyes taking in the cracked vinyl seats and the outdated menu boards. One of his companions, a younger man with nervous energy, suggested they go somewhere else, but Vaughn waved him off. He said something about wanting to see how ordinary people lived, and his group laughed as they settled into the largest booth near the window. Lisa finished pouring coffee for an elderly couple and then walked toward the new arrivals, pulling her order pad from her apron pocket. As she approached, Vaughn was in the middle of a story, his voice loud enough to carry across the diner. He was talking about a recent business deal he had closed with an alien species called the Gentari, insectoid beings who had recently established trade relations with humanity. Vaughn bragged about how his company's translation software had made the negotiations possible, how without his algorithms, humanity would still be stumbling around in the dark, trying to communicate with alien civilizations. His companions nodded and made appropriate sounds of admiration, though one of them, a woman with sharp eyes and dark hair named Claire Hopkins, seemed less enthusiastic than the others. Vaughn continued his monologue, explaining that success in the new galactic economy required intelligence, education, and most importantly, wealth to fund the right technologies. He said that humanity's expansion into space had created clear divisions between those who contributed to progress and those who simply existed on the margins, performing menial tasks that anyone could do. His words dripped with condescension, and Lisa noticed several other patrons glancing over with disapproval, but no one said anything. Lisa reached the table and stood quietly, waiting for a pause in the conversation. Vaughn did not acknowledge her presence, continuing to talk while occasionally gesturing expansively. After nearly a minute, Lisa politely cleared her throat and asked if she could take their drink orders. Vaughn stopped mid-sentence and turned to look at her, his eyes moving from her face to her name tag and back again. His expression shifted into something between amusement and contempt. He asked her name, though it was clearly visible on the tag pinned to her uniform. Lisa responded quietly that her name was Lisa Martinez. Vaughn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He made a comment about her last name, asking if she spoke Spanish, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer and found it predictable. Lisa confirmed that yes, she spoke Spanish. Vaughn nodded as if this proved some point he had been making, then turned to his companions and said this was exactly what he had been talking about. People in service positions with limited skills and limited futures, stuck in jobs that required nothing more than the ability to carry plates and speak one additional language. The table laughed, though Claire looked uncomfortable. Other patrons in the diner had gone quiet, sensing the cruel undercurrent in Vaughn's words. Lisa stood perfectly still, her expression neutral, her hands holding the order pad steady. She had encountered people like Vaughn before, people who measured worth in credits and status, who believed their success made them superior to everyone else. She had learned long ago that responding to such cruelty with anger only gave it more power. Vaughn was not finished. Emboldened by the attention and the laughter of his group, he pulled out his data tablet and tapped the screen a few times. Then he raised his voice, addressing not just his table but the entire diner. He announced that he wanted to make things interesting, that he was feeling generous tonight. He said he would transfer 100,000 credits to Lisa's account right now if she could speak to him in Mandarin Chinese for 5 minutes, without using any kind of translation device. The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. The diner went completely silent. 100,000 credits was more money than most of the people in the room would see in years. It was also clearly a setup, a cruel game designed to humiliate. Vaughn had chosen Mandarin because it was known as one of Earth's most difficult languages, with its tonal complexity and thousands of characters. He assumed a waitress in a neighborhood diner would never have had the education or resources to learn it. His smile was predatory as he waited for Lisa to stammer out an excuse or walk away in embarrassment. Lisa looked at Vaughn for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she asked, in a calm voice, whether he wanted her to simply speak in Mandarin or if he would prefer to have an actual conversation. The question surprised him. He had expected nervousness or refusal, not this quiet confidence. Intrigued despite himself, Vaughn leaned back in his seat and said he would even converse with her if she could manage it, his tone suggesting he believed this was impossible.